I will go on record as saying that saturation is probably the single most overused adjustment in photography. I also feel it isn't very well understood, and this is a dangerous combination. Saturation is available in every photo editing software package I can think of. It usually is presented as a slider like this one. But what is saturation? Saturation is two things. The first is that it removes black from the colored parts of the picture. When you remove black from colors, it makes them more clear. Keep in mind that a dark red has a richness to it, while a clear red is more like a carnival color. A carnival color may not be your desired effect, but let's say it is. Applying the effect to this picture, you can see that the leaves become lighter as saturation is applied. The second thing saturation does is something few people think about. Saturation actually changes the color. It eliminates the transitional colors. Where you may have an orangey red, increasing the saturation converts it to a pure red. In this picture, there are a lot of colors between red and magenta. When I crank up the saturation, you can now see that I have patches of magenta and patches of red. Now, I know I've cranked up the saturation beyond reason here, but I do it to highlight the fact that saturation actually modifies the colors. This might be okay for a picture with a lot of prime colors, but it won't suit you well for other situations. Some of those situations are pictures of skin tones or pictures where the color hasn't been corrected. Here's an example of what happens when you crank up saturation on skin tones. His lips have turned pure red, and his skin has become a jaundice yellow. This picture has a yellow color cast to it. If we saturate the picture, any color flaw that was in the picture is now magnified with the saturation. This is the same picture with color correction applied before the saturation. It looks completely different. One final point about saturation. Removing black has to be done with care. If you remove black too aggressively, you'll lose detail in the picture. Look closely and you'll see a whole bunch of tiny little veins in these leaves. If I crank up the saturation, I lose all of them. I can imagine that some of you are thinking that you'd never crank up the saturation this much, but you don't have to crank it up like I have to see the effects. If you have colors that are already saturated, like the stable colors here, even the slightest attempt to increase the saturation of the grass will cause you to lose detail in jerseys. This is why saturation may be one of the adjustments I rarely perform. And while saturation isn't a good option, in my opinion, for making an adjustment, it can be an entirely valid approach when you're adjusting only sections of an image.